What's up, everybody? Welcome to the newest episode of Demo Day, the podcast for entrepreneurs and venture capitalists where we demystify the culture of joining one of the top accelerator, incubator, or VC programs from around the world. I'm your host, Sean Goldpatten, CEO of Coefficient Labs, and on today's episode, we'll be interviewing Minnie Ingersoll, partner at TenOneTen Ventures and the host of the LA Venture podcast. Minnie was a co-founder and COO at Shift, an online marketplace for buying and selling used cars, and started her career as an early product manager at Google. At TenOneTen, Minnie invests from pre-seed to seed plus and loves working with technical founders who are passionate about what they're building. On today's episode, we'll talk about what it was like working at Google before they became the behemoth of a company they are today. Why a startup should move fast on everything except for their people. How to go about raising your very first round of funding and how things can change along the way. And the importance of emotional resilience when you're faced with the most difficult tasks. Also, for anyone listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or checking it out on our website, please head on over to the Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Demo Day is quickly rising through the ranks, and we count on your reviews to really make it in this world. Thank you from all of us at Coefficient Labs. Without further ado, let's get into Demo Day. Minnie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate from all of us at Demo Day and Coefficient Labs. Thanks for jumping on today.
Oh, super excited to be here.
Minnie, I wanted to start this podcast by just talking a little bit about some of the things that I've heard on some of your earlier podcasts is just around how with everything in society today and with the news, there's so much chaos and it can even feel almost distressful in some ways. But when you think about entrepreneurship and you think about innovation, you feel so positive and excited. And so my question to you is, why is the journey of technology and of innovation so important to you?
It's important partly for the reasons you said, which is there's a lot going on in our world that can cause you to sort of lose faith and say, oh, do I believe our government is really functioning right now? Do I believe our society is really functioning? And yet one real bright spot, especially in the US right now, is innovation. And there's so much cutting edge work that is possible today that wasn't possible. And I think the entrepreneurial spirit is just thriving and probably seeing a real heyday. So I'm excited to be part of that movement. And as you said, I've been at Google, which is, has revolutionized how we get access to information in huge ways that have, all sorts of implications. And I think, point to an industry and you can see how there's similar things going on right now.
Now, we'll talk about your time at Google in a little bit, but I know some of the projects you worked on were things like Google Fiber, and you really were helping to get the technology out to people in a faster, more inexpensive way for the internet and technology. Where did this curiosity come from? This is not something you're just doing now. You've always been really helping people utilize technology to make society better. Where does the curiosity come from, and have you always had it?
Yeah, so there's different parts of that. And one is the Google piece of things like Google Fiber and where that motivation really was coming from. And I think that some of that motivation was a feeling that our corporations, our organization, our businesses today are more than about maximizing shareholder value, and that they have to be, and that's what's really going to move the needle in our society. And so being part of an organization like Google that believes that it's not just a public company, it's actually part of a movement. It's part of playing a bigger role in society. For me, where does that come from? From a deep, when I was a child, was I trying to change the world sort of feeling? I would say it probably comes from a desire to be on the forefront of whatever is most exciting. And not just exciting, but, what's hot? Like, what's exciting? Like, how do I maximize my, realize my full potential, that sort of thing.
Did you grow up in Los Angeles or did you grow up in the Bay Area?
I grew up here in LA, in Pasadena.
Oh, wow. And at what point did you move up north?
Yeah, I moved for Stanford. So I grew up here in Pasadena and to a very academic family. So my dad's at Caltech, my mom's at USC, but very much in academia. Not, I think some nowadays USC has a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of accelerators, that sort of thing wasn't what I was exposed to in my family. And then I moved to the Bay Area for Stanford.
What did you do for fun as a kid? Were you, very book savvy in the classroom, or did you also have other hobbies when you were growing up?
I just played sports, actually. Yeah. I was, kind of on the nerdier side of things. And my family was really nerdy. And we lived with a bunch of Caltech grad students. And I would have been kind of awkward and nerdy, except that I was really good at sports. And so that was great. I think it would have been a far different high school experience if I hadn't been playing a lot of sports all the time.
How would your teachers or some of your best friends describe you way back when?
My mother said that I was well-liked by everyone but librarians. I have a lot of enthusiasm, which is great in most, on the soccer field, that's great. In the library, it's less great. I think people would always say that I'm an enthusiastic participant in whatever I do. As I told you before, people often turn down my microphone.
And were you always entrepreneurial in high school and growing up, or did that entrepreneurial business bug start to come at a later time in your life?
No, I think I was always very driven to be doing, I had an itch, and I don't know where that itch came from, but I definitely had an itch to be doing something important. And I think maybe that came a little bit from being in an academic family where I felt like a lot of academia was about publishing papers on the minutia of the minutia and studying forever. And I think my reaction to that was wanting to be in business and in the flow of whatever was going on. And now you decided to go to Stanford. You were a computer science student. So did you know you wanted to be, not a computer. No, right,
okay.
Right. But I was anticipating the question of, did I always know I wanted to be in computer science?
Yes.
Which was the no.
No.
I thought I wanted to study math. This is, I started college in 94. So I thought I wanted to study math, and I got to Stanford and thought, let's see what's going on in the math department. And it turns out that there was a lot going on in the computer science department. And, early, and I graduated in 98. So, just in the computer science department, that was just exploding. And it continues to explode for the past 20 years. So that was why I ended up in computer science.
And after you left today going to Stanford as a computer science engineer and then coming out, it's like that's your ticket now to immediately getting a job at one of these great schools. Was it always like that back in the late 90s, or were there, much less companies and being an engineer didn't have the same sort of, appeal as it does today?
No, it was still a great ticket to doing what you wanted to do, but it was just less defined. So my first job was as a product manager, and product management wasn't a discipline. There were many things that are disciplines today, just big data didn't really exist in the same way. Being a product manager wasn't defined. And so there weren't a lot of examples to look to about what is a product manager supposed to do, for instance.
So when you got out of Stanford, did you have this clear idea of this is what I want to do, or did you have to, assess life and kind of repackage what you thought you wanted to do?
No, I have never known. I still don't know what I want to do. But I want to continue doing what I've done, which is staying current, relevant, figuring out how to sort of maximize, realize my full potential or something. I think I'm very driven, but I don't know where that comes from. Mm-hmm. But I never know what that means, because it's I think a reaction to what is going on in the macro forces of our society sort of dictates what's interesting and where to apply your energy, I think.
Interesting. Very interesting. And so when you were, in that period out of school, do you remember, what was the story? Was there a story behind Google? Was it, just a recruiter came and you talked, or was there something more to how you actually got into that organization?
So it should have been that. So I graduated in 98. Marissa Mayer was one of my classmates.
Oh, wow.
She's former CEO of Yahoo, and Larry and Sergey were grad students when I was there. And I had a lot of overlap because it was a very Stanford-heavy organization. But the truth is, that's not how I that helped with my interview process, but it was my mother saw an ad on Google.com that said, "You're brilliant, we're hiring." And she sent it to me and said, "Minnie, you're brilliant." But, it was from my mother, actually, that I got introduced into Google.
Wow. And now, did you go to Harvard Business School after Google or before Google?
Right. So that was finishing Harvard Business School. So I finished Stanford, didn't know what I wanted to do, became a product manager early. The bubble burst in 2000, and I was at a .com that we had just IPO'd in March of 2000. And then I went to business school, and then I went to Google.
And going to Harvard Business School, do you remember what some of the takeaways coming out of the top, or at least one of the top couple business schools in the country? Any takeaways that you still remember to this day as you were graduating and leaving Harvard behind?
That's an interesting question. Can I think about it for a second?
Yeah, totally. Maybe another way of asking the same question would be, now that you have you have startups under your belt, you've built businesses, you're working in VC, you have all of these now experiences behind you. Would you have done Harvard Business School exactly the same way, or would you have maybe not gone at all?
One of my pet peeves is, and it's in myself, is when people feel like they're not good enough to do X, or they don't know why, so they can't do something. And I think that one of the best things that Harvard Business School gives you is you don't feel like you missed out on that and there was some secret recipe for success or leadership or accounting or whatever that everyone else has and you're missing. Because you can go and say, oh, I should have been exposed to all of this. And so you don't have that feeling. And I meet people who feel like, I'm not qualified to do something because I didn't go to Harvard Business School, or I didn't go to business school. I need to have gone to business school. I see this more often with people who say, I'm not technical enough. And it's like, I'm not technical enough to understand what an API is. And you're like, look, there's inputs and outputs. You are technical enough. And so I think that's one of the best things that Harvard Business School does, is it at least should make you feel like, I know that I'm not missing out on something.
And now, I started to ask this question before, but what was it like working for Sergey and Larry once you got in? One of my favorite stories you talk about is how Sergey would only let employees pitch him on new business ideas if he thought that the business unit could be a $5 billion market. I was just curious, do you have any other fun stories from the earlier days of Google, or just things that, when you're at a dinner, you love telling people about?
Sure. Early days of Google. So, one of the projects I worked on was we were trying to buy spectrum. So this is airwaves from the FCC. And the way that buying spectrum works is we were trying to buy a nationwide license, and we had to go to the board and ask for $5 billion in order to compete in this spectrum auction. And so, when you do fundraisers, a lot of people march up and down Sand Hill Road and ask for, $10 million. This is a $5 billion ask. The board said yes. So we got approved to go bid on this spectrum, which is there's a lot of aspects to the story. It was a really interesting experience. But it's a multiple round process that you go through with the FCC, where you submit a bid and then you wait to see whether you get outbid in this sort of multi-week long process of submitting bids, and you have to maintain your eligibility. And I remember, and we were in a little locked closet because you had to keep it locked, and most employees couldn't access the room. There were only 3 of us who could, to actually place the bids on the secure computer. And one day we walked in and it said on the whiteboard, AT&T was here, WUZ. We're like, who had access to this room? It wasn't the 3 of us. And of course, it was Sergey who actually did have access and came in and was just, messing with us.
Oh my.
But we went through some crazy times with early Google days, where it felt like the Wild West.
One of the things that you talk about frequently is, at least at your time at Google, and it seems like it's stuck with you since your time there, is how important hiring is. And even that in some cases, hiring was one of the most important KPIs you were measured at. So my question is, for maybe younger managers and founders like myself, what advice do you have for managers or founders who want to improve this metric? And maybe even the pre-question, what is the metric? How do you actually define what being a great, recruiter, a great hiring manager means?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest advice that I probably would give, I'm sorry, it's not a silver bullet, is the amount of time to dedicate to it. It is really the most important thing you need to do if you're in a growing company. And so you need to just realize that you just need to block that time and spend time on it, because it should be whatever percent of your time. It should be 40%, 50% of your time if you're at a rapidly growing startup. And then the other thing is figure out what a good process looks like. I have a process that I like to run. Broadly, I could tell you, I have the way I run a process is to define what success looks like in the role in 18 months. So I sort of say, try to hire someone who's going to be good, who's going to solve problems for the next 18 months.
Okay.
You can't hire someone who's going to solve the problems in 3 years, 4 years. It's hard to define that. But you want someone who has enough room to grow. They'll be solving the problem for 18 months. Define what success looks like in 18 months. Define maybe 4, but not more than 4 characteristics so that are going to enable that person to be successful, and then come up with your questions and your personas for meeting those 4 most important needs.
So I think for listeners, and I'm actually taking words that I heard you say, most of the work is before the interview even comes in. It's the research, the planning, the process, all of these, which kind of leads me into my next question, which is, oftentimes founders are in this chaotic rush of like plugging holes. You start a business, you get your first clients, you need to hire people. There's all this stuff happening, and you end up hiring, friends, family, people that maybe wouldn't fit your process or model. I think you said you'd even hired your nephew to work with you in the early days of your first startup. And so my, question is really like, when, why is team so important? Because, if you rush into hiring and you choose the wrong people because you're trying to plug all of these pieces, you sometimes don't realize that you're actually creating bigger holes for yourself down the road. So my question is, why is team so important to you? And what are a few other tips you have for founders that are really about slowing down? Because sometimes you're trying to move so fast, but again, the question is, why is team so important? And what are a few tips you have for founders to slow down?
Well, tips to slow down is an interesting one, because I would say that startups need to move. The advantage that a startup has against a player like Google is speed. And so I think you got to move fast. And what I say is I have learned, I feel like I need to move fast on everything except for people. And that's the way I think about things, which is people, and that's not just on hiring, but that's personnel discussions, decisions. Should we reorg and maybe, do something more like a matrix organization? You can't just sort of throw that out there. That needs to be a thoughtful, deliberate thing, because you can freak people out and cause people a lot of anxiety. And so I don't recommend slowing down on anything except for being very deliberate about who you hire and running a good process.
And what you're looking for in that hire.
Yes, and defining that upfront, because, as you alluded to, you won't be able to move quickly on the hiring if you haven't done the work upfront, because you won't then have shared agreement on what are the 4 characteristics we're most optimizing for in our hires, because you can actually have 20 things that seem important, but 20 things means that you don't really have a good rubric.
For most parents, I know I'm speaking for mine, all they want is for their children to be happy and successful and everything just great for them. And I'm sure when you said to mom and dad, I'm thinking about leaving Google to start my own thing.
Used car company, specifically.
To start a used car company. When did you know it was time to leave Google, and how did you communicate that with your friends and family?
Yeah. Well, so first off, I'm one of 5 children. So I think that, your standard slip or something a little bit, like at some point I have a 3rd kid, and, the 3rd kid isn't getting exactly the same customized photo album as my first did. But one thing that someone said to me that I really liked was he talked about a V1 marker for airplanes, or maybe it's a V1 speed that airplanes have, which is define what your V1 marker is, which is the marker at which you can leave your steady, high-paying, regular job and quit to pursue your dream. And that might be that you're able to line up X number of customers. It might be that you have an MVP. It might be that your partner has a stable job, whatever that is. And that V1 marker is, if you hit it, then you can leave your stable job. And if you don't hit it, then you got to stay at your stable job for a while.
And so I think that you took the question. My next question was going to be, what advice do you have for people that are currently at Amazon and Facebook, and they've got these, amazing salaries and all of these benefits? It sounds like you're saying that if you're in this position and you're on the fence about whether I should go or stay, that setting kind of that minimum viable criteria of like, if I'm able to hit this metric or this milestone, that would be enough for me to say like, okay, it's time for me to move on.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of the founder who says, I think I want to be an entrepreneur. So I'm a business school student who's analyzed, made a matrix. I'm going to choose the thing that's in the, upper right quadrant, whatever. There's someone who says, I'm a mom and I go to my kid's daycare and I can see this problem and I've experienced this problem. That's different to me than saying, I own a franchise of daycares. I know firsthand, because I run a dozen daycares, what the real problem is. One sort of more, I don't know if that's the right analogy, I just came up with it. But but there's sort of I've seen some problem, I think I could solve it, versus I am deep in this thing and I need to solve, the CRM for daycares everywhere needs to be solved because I suffer from it and I'm going to solve it for myself no matter what anyways. So maybe this is also a business, but there's something where it's ingrained in your business. So I don't think you should leave your stable job lightly, I guess is what I'm saying.
So, you had lightheartedly said, I left Google to start a used car. So what was it about this used car business that just got you so, fired up that it made you, ready to take the move?
Yeah, it was more gradual. It was like boiling a frog more than anything else on this one. I was on maternity leave with my first child, and I had told Google I'm really gonna take 6 months off. I think I said, and I'm gonna get rid of all my responsibilities so I can really have a break. It's my first child. And it turns out that when you're staying home with a baby, you can get, if you're me, I got antsy and started wanting to, dabble in things. And my co-founder said, why don't you help me get this idea going? And he'd been talking to me about it for a long time while we were at Google. And I think I got more hooked on just the rush that is startup life, even more than I was hooked on the particular problem we were solving. But we'd have an idea for a website and we'd, sketch it out on a napkin, and then we turned it into a working website that people were using. 6 weeks later, we launched, and that wasn't, you didn't launch something in 6 weeks at Google based on a napkin sketch that you had, a wireframe. So I just got hooked on that speed and that pace, and it became very intoxicating.
Now, once you ended up leaving Google to start your company, I love, you started in your co-founder's apartment, then you moved to a little bit of a bigger apartment, but it was still an apartment. What was it like for you raising your first round of funding?
Hard, actually, very hard on a variety of levels. Different rounds were of different, each one had different experiences. Our very first round was still asking friends and family for money. And that's hard to do. And yet I very much am a believer in it, because once I had raised money from, literally my family members or people who I thought could spare, could actually write a check for $25,000, I then felt incredibly vested in being a good steward of that investment, because a lot of people were investing in me. And so that was a very motivating thing. But, it's hard to ask people for money, especially when they're not institutional check writers. So that was hard for our first round. And then once we started talking to institutions, which we did have some more professional funding for our first round, then it became sort of a process of learning what I didn't know and just feeling like every conversation I need to be incredibly well prepared, because people would ask me questions and I realized, I don't know exactly how to, I don't know the full landscape of the what the history of the auto industry. So there was a lot of that as well. But then, specifically on our first round, it was sort of one of those where once we raised the first 500K or something, then everyone wanted in and we raised 3 million, which I see over and over now.
Now, I think, one of the things that I love about this part of your story is that it sheds light onto, there's a lot of people that are sitting at home going, well, I never went to Stanford. I never went to Harvard. I didn't do any of the things that Minnie did. So that's where my fear is coming from, because I didn't do these. But what you find is that even when talking to you, you've graduated Stanford, you've gone to Harvard, but even you who has those quote unquote accolades under your belt still gets into that room and you're still getting poked and prodded and they're asking you questions that feel uncomfortable. And I think it's just really, amazing to know that you have to be resilient no matter what your circumstances are, that raising money is a long journey. And I think it's really inspiring for people to know that like even you had trouble raising money when you had the top of the accolades, working for Google, all of these things. And so I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I certainly felt it was certainly hard for us. So yes, but also I think that you can have fear and nervousness regardless of what your background is, and I think it's important to look at that and say, what is my fear about? What do I have to lose by going for this, getting rejected? It sucks, and yet looking at that and understanding where is your fear coming from. Like fear is actually a reasonable word in this case. Like I felt like a rube walking into Sequoia. And yet, as you say, like I went to Harvard Business School, I should feel fine. But it was still worth sort of trying to identify what's behind that fear and what do I have to lose?
Do you think, and maybe this is a question for later, but do you think that it's still the same mentality? Do you think that world has changed a lot since the first days when you were going in, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years ago? That same process of, going in, everyone sitting around the table. Is it always the same, and do you think it will always be the same?
I think some things have changed a lot in the past, I don't know, call it 3 years or something. I think some of it has been around Me Too movement broadly, but a sort of a recognition of there's been a lot of work on diversity, a lot of work on inclusion in the sense of recognizing our biases and recognizing just the way we operate needs to change, recognizing that 5% of people who are getting funded are women or whatever the percentage is nowadays. That sort of stuff I think has changed, and yet I still think it's incredibly hard to get funding. There's just a huge, larger number of entrepreneurs than there are people willing to write a Series A check.
Yeah.
So it's still incredibly hard. And so some has changed and some hasn't, I guess.
Did you learn? I think that there's it's just such a different world to be in that apartment with the 5, 6, 7 people. You guys are almost like family. We're sitting in this, what is almost like an apartment right now with my team. And so we're with each other at such close quarters, but then you get funding, then you start growing, then you have 20 and 30 and 50 and 100 employees. Anything you learned about yourself, it could be positive, it could be negative, around just being a part of a rocket ship. It's not just like, hacking it together with your friends anymore. It's now this thing where there's so much investment. Any takeaways you had, whether they're positive or negative, from being a part of that?
Gosh, lots of different things. One was just sort of my own emotional journey of the pants on fire all the time. Another would be on hiring, and you want to hire people then who know what they're getting into and want that, and so are going to be a good fit for being able to move fast and be comfortable with ambiguity. And, so testing for that. Are you comfortable with a lot of ambiguity? Because if your company's doubling in size every 6 months, there's going to be a lot of, you're not going to have perfect clarity about what is your role going to look like in 6 months. So getting comfortable with all of that. And then for me, just getting comfortable with things like, how do I still have work-life balance? How do I still go to bed every night, get some exercise, eat healthy food? All of those things, show up for things that make me uncomfortable, and still keep doing that.
Well, something that I love, and we're going to talk about just emotional intelligence and the resilience that you talk about. But I love how you say that one of the best ways to de-stress is to quote unquote go for it. And the more times you go for it, the less it feels like this a big hurdle to overcome. And I even think it was kind of parlayed into one of your first big hurdles as a founder around your layoffs. And I know that there was one, time I can tell from all of the podcasts I've listened to you on, like this particular moment was really, really stressful and like it kept you up at night. You were so worried about the emotions of your team. And so my first question is, can you bring us into your mindset during that time, like right in the middle of the shit, basically? What was your mindset? And then, to bridge it, how did you overcome it? Like, what was the mental mindset of this is how I'm going to get over this big hurdle and hump? Because it was really impacting you.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had many of these. I can talk about the time that we had to do a round of layoffs, so a RIF. Yes, a reduction in force, which is different than, giving anyone any advance warning for performance problems. This is people show up, aren't expecting it, and you have to ask them, give me your laptop, give me your keys, and that was hard. But there've been so many moments like that have been hard and uncomfortable. I can tell you about that one. So I think one thing was I felt when I first was sort of coming to the realization that we were going to have to change our model, and that meant fire people. It was so heavy and I just hadn't understood it. And when I started having conversations about it, when I was starting to able to name it, I think that diffused a lot of my stress around it. So I remember talking with one of my board members, and she wasn't dismissive, but she was almost dismissive in a way that was very helpful to me. Like, okay, Ingersoll, get over yourself. Like, this isn't like this isn't the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. No one is dying. Like, pull up your big boy pants kind of thing. Like, I don't know what the right expression is, but something like that.
That was very athletic. Like, come on, Ingersoll. You've got to pull it together.
Yeah, pull it together. Like, you got to pull it together. Like, you can't be the one who's stressing out. Like, you got to execute this like a good process almost. But she was sympathetic, but sort of the ability to talk to, in this case, she was a board member who'd been through this with other companies, and to say, yeah, she's seen it before, and like these things happen, and this is startup life, and there's gonna be massive times where you feel like you're, losing sleep, you feel like your hair is falling out, but do it, show up, tell the truth, hope for the best.
Can you talk to us about how you handled it? So you've mentally broken it down. The board member has given you some like pep pump up talk. How did you actually then go about it? And I guess, another question that's sort of parlayed to it is there a right way of going about it? Knowing that, you've now gone through it, did you think to yourself, like, there's a right way, or is there even a right way to lay a person off? So how did you go through it, and is there a right way to do it?
I'm not sure. Luckily, I have not done this many times, but one piece of advice, or one thing that we did, was we were extremely thoughtful. It was very planned. Everything about it was very, very executed down to, at this minute, this person is going to be here. At this minute, this person is going to be there. So we did things. Yeah.
Is that how you needed it to be to do it in the way that felt right to you, or is the way the board recommend? How did you get to that conclusion of having it be so set up in that way?
I think we talked to some senior head of HR type people who knew what best practices might look like, and they gave us some advice on how to structure something. So it wasn't just for me. It was actually like, the thing you don't want is for the people who are staying to wonder, number one, am I next? So, let's say that you're bringing people into a room. Everyone shows up to work one day, and you start calling names out and like, you're fired. And you don't want someone to be sitting there thinking, oh, I'm about to get fired. Like, I'm, this is the firing squad coming for me or something. I mean,
yeah.
So actually the tactical basics of who's in which room when matters, nor do you want people who've just been laid off are in tears walking out to their area and having everyone starts crying together or something. Like, you need to execute this tactically in a way that, luckily we weren't laying off that many people, and but it still, to me, felt very heavy to have to lay off anybody. Mm-hmm. So
was it an immediate relief for you, or is it something, meaning like after it was done, it was like, phew, I'm done with that? Or is it something that, lingered for, weeks or months afterwards?
No, it was hard. And some people were, it lingered for me. Like, it was hard for me to do. I think I came home that day and said, I'm going to have PTSD. Like, and, in the grand scheme of things, we weren't doing, a lot of people were given different jobs. Like we just changed what workforce we had in the field. But it took like a couple months. And then so many people said like, hey, like looked me up on LinkedIn. Hey, just got a new job. Like everyone turned out to be fine. But it's not, no one lost lives over this. And yet it was very, like, there were certain people that I still could discuss. Like I fired someone who said like, this is the best job I've ever had. Like, are you sure? Sort of things. And I was like, I'm sure. I need your keys, and just sort of maintaining a professional aspect to it.
Not even though internally you felt the emotion, understanding just the world that you were currently in, and that the emotion wasn't going to help or hurt the situation.
Yeah. Now, I mean, this was probably before. This was many years ago, right? So this is probably before we raised our Series B. So I mean, it's again an example of startups are like that. This is, it was a very existential moment for us, but this is after our Series A, maybe before our B. I might have the timing wrong, but then then we went on and raised a B and grew a lot, and raised a C, grew a lot. So you can recover from these things, even though at the time it felt like I was going to have PTSD for the rest of my life. I don't.
Just fine.
Yeah.
Still happy and energetic.
Yeah.
Now, when you were at Shift, so you're growing. You just mentioned, you raised your Series A, then your Series B, then your Series C. Was there a moment where you or I guess of course there was, because you've since moved on. When was the moment that you started to think to yourself like, okay, I think I'm ready for the next chapter of life? Was it, any particular thing, or was it just like a series of just, revelations or reflection?
I don't know that I ever feel ready for the next chapter of life. That's a big one. But, there've been moments where different things. So like I see Shift cars driving around all the time, and it still makes me super excited. I think having a team in place is probably the biggest thing. So feeling like, okay, there's a team in place. For me, it was actually having a third child that then I said, for some reason, having children, it's a chance for reflecting on what you're doing, and are you able to like step away and focus on family for a while you've got a new baby.
Were you on maternity leave with your third child when you came to the decision? Because I would be like, oh gosh, Minnie's having a child. Everyone,
I know.
Brace yourselves. Yeah. Brace yourselves.
It was when I think I was pregnant with my third, so I knew the third was coming, and I was sort of doing some planning there. I think I just felt like Shift was in a good place, and I actually could leave and move to LA was also part of it, as I knew I'd been wanting to move to LA for a decade.
Now, one of my favorite things that you talk about is choose the partner, not the fund. And, you talk about it in context of when you're raising money. So, when you were at Shift, you're like, we went to Sequoia, we went to this, we went to that, but really it's the partners that are within Sequoia or within these different VC funds that are going to be, the real cheerleaders and people helping. So in the context of TenOneTen, choose the partner, not the fund. What was it about, David, Gil, Eitan, Austin, and Todd that, really made you feel like they were the right partners as opposed to the right fund?
Yeah, well, I'd love to answer that. I will say, though, I maybe amend my choose the partner, not the fund, or because I see so many entrepreneurs who don't have a choice. There's so many people raising money, and some of our raises at Shift were easier than others. But sometimes you're in a position to be picky, and sometimes you're not. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people who are trying to get funding and are struggling to get funding. And to some degree, it's like if someone offers you $10 million, you might take it if that's the position you're in. So with that caveat, so I have known Gil and Eitan and Eva Ho at Fika Ventures.
Okay.
They were all part of Applied Semantics. So Gil and Eitan were the founders of
old AdSense, right?
Exactly. Yes. And it became, so they started Applied Semantics, which became AdSense. Google bought AdSense. They continued to run it out of LA. So Gil was the head of the Google LA office. I mean, very OG. We're talking sort of 2003, 2004, when I was at Google. So I've been following their progress for a long time. And also they are, I would say, we now have a reputation of being nice and nerdy, which I very much feel, coming from Silicon Valley and coming from a background in computer science, I didn't want to move to LA and focus on celebrity branded e-commerce because it's just something I know nothing about. So I really was trying to find people who felt like really great tech investors.
And how do you describe 10-1-10 to your peers? So for someone that's like, oh, cool, Minnie, you're working at what's 10-1-10?
Yeah. Well, some of it I do say it's 10-1-10 is a nice nerdy fund in LA, seed fund in LA, and has been around sort of, as I said, an OG sort of fund. We like to fund engineers turned entrepreneurs is what I often say, which is we understand when tech is a moat. Way better than if brand is your moat. I was telling you, I don't even know that we've branded ourselves. We are not great branders. And so, if you're depending on brand being a moat, it's probably not something where we can add a lot of value. If tech is your moat, we can really understand that. And a lot of times we'll find people where, it might be a business model play. Like I just built a marketplace where there's a lot of interesting network effects, but there's still often a tech component.
What advice do you have for a much younger version of Minnie, a version that did not go to Google, did not go and work, start your own business and was a founder, but you're 21, 22, 23, 25, let's say, and you're thinking about joining one of these top VC funds, or you want to be in one of these top VC funds. What advice do you have for that person that really has always been passionate about it, but doesn't know the very first step he should take, or she?
Well, it depends where you are in that journey. I think that you can do a lot of things like listen to podcasts. I mean, you and I share this passion for podcasting. There's a lot of information out there now where you can get to know how other people have gotten their start, that sort of thing. I also think that doing investing to whatever extent is possible is the best way of starting to get to see deal flow. So maybe it's not even investing, but starting to see a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of companies is a great way of starting to do essentially what you would be doing if you were in venture, for instance.
I'm going to follow up similar question, but more tactical. So I think that there's this, I don't know if it's a fear, because I know there's a lot of people that will just go and cold email you right off the bat, but no one likes to be cold emailed or cold outreach. So what should someone do? Like, what's the best step for someone that wants to work at a great fund, but doesn't have this experience in this resume? Is there anything you would recommend them do to get on someone like yours radar?
Well, kind of what I was saying about doing angel investing is then a way of getting deal flow, which is then a way of getting connected. So one of my favorite things is we have some angels. I would love it if there were more angels in LA, but it doesn't have to be necessarily an angel investor. It could just be someone who's seeing a lot of deals and sending me ones that say, hey, Minnie, this looks like the sort of thing you'd be interested in.
And what I heard there, which, some people might be thinking to themselves like, yeah, but Minnie, I don't have money to be an angel investor, but you still could bring deals, or you could be a source of deal flow, and that's something that could get onto a radar of one of these types of teams.
And that requires work, because it's not like send me any deals you see, because actually I get tons of people just, hey, look at this. Too many deals. I get way too many deals, but I have a few people, probably a dozen people, who I always read their emails because they only send me really good deals, because they kind of know what I'm interested in, but also they put in the hours, they're putting in the legwork to go to every pitch competition, incubator, everything, to know everything that's out there, and then they're sifting through it and sending me things that look really good.
So that's a great segue into some of our tips for first-time founders. I really love the saying that your mom gave you around chop wood, carry water. Can you explain chop wood, carry water a little bit, and maybe how you've had to face that in your own business career?
Chop wood, carry water. It's a similar thing to, I think that's like the title of my book, but it's similar to show up, tell the truth, hope for the best. It's a very similar notion, which is in my hardest times in life, I have not wanted to get out of bed, and it's really been hard to get out of bed. And just like, I don't want to face life, and yet you have to chop wood, carry water. You still have to put one foot in front of the other, all that stuff. And there's times where you think everyone else's life is all, you compare your insides to other people's outsides, right? But you sometimes just have to keep getting through stuff. So that's a very negative version of chop wood, carry water. But that's kind of what I mean, which is you have to keep going through the times that you don't want to keep going through, because the highs will come. There are times where you just can't see that there is going to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it's like a belief that going through the struggle is what gets you to, I think Ryan Holiday came out with that book, The Obstacle is the Way. Like going through that is the way for you to get past that. Now, one of the interesting tidbits I found was how you guys thought about how much money to raise from VCs, and you had this interesting hack tactic around take the fund size, divide by 50. So for, there's so many people right now thinking like, oh my gosh, I've got this big meeting. What should I ask for? How much? Can you talk a little bit about just the overall theme? It might not be still perfect today, but just curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, that was something someone told me, and I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't anyone tell me that earlier? Which is, yes, take the fund size, divide by 50, and that's approximately the size check that they want to write. And I find it still amazing how opaque it is to know what is the average check size of the fund that I'm going to go talk to. And it's not easy to just know what is their sweet spot. But most funds, and this is a huge generalization, might want to write about 25 new checks out of a particular fund, and they might want to reserve about twice that amount for follow-on. And so that would be then, if they want to make 25 new investments but have twice that amount, fund size divided by 50.
Now, why is that important? Because you can price yourself out of the deal, or something. Like if you're asking for too much or too little, it might not be the right sort of fit for that VC fund.
Exactly. So sometimes people send me deal flow and they say, this is the perfect deal for you, Minnie. It's a flower company raising a Series B, and I'm like, clearly you haven't done your homework. Like we don't invest into Series A or later rounds because we like to write checks that are around $700K, let's say. That's an average check size for us. So don't come asking for, if you're doing an $8 million raise, we're not going to be able to get the ownership that we're looking to have.
One of the other, sayings or quotes that I love that you talk about is that VCs are not your customer. And we work so much with the accelerator programs and the incubators and early stage funds in town here. And, there's that, the show is called Demo Day. Everything is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, can be almost feel like, oh, we have to sell the VC. It's always about selling the VC. Will you talk to us a little bit more about where that kind of saying came for you and why it's important not to, believe that the VC is your customer?
Yeah, because you can show up and just think, I'm gonna prep exactly what the VC wants to hear, and there's a formula here, and it comes across as disingenuous. So there's a TAM slide that everyone puts into their deck that half of the time, maybe more than that, is completely worthless, because what they've done is they said VCs only like to invest if there's a huge addressable market. So they put some TAM slide, which is the total addressable market, and it actually doesn't speak at all to what they're doing. It's just they felt like they needed to do it, so they put something in there. And most VCs only give you a 30-minute initial meeting. And so you've got 30 minutes, and you end up, your first 3 slides are slides that are not really about what you're building and the unique insight that you have. And so my biggest advice, one of my pieces of advice, is you have to think for yourself at every stage.
Can you elaborate? When you say think for yourself at every stage, what do you mean?
Especially when you're not, this applies when you're at Google, but this is especially true when you don't have a whole bureaucracy around you and a boss telling you what metrics you're going to be measured on. You have to pause and carve out time to think for yourself and not be thinking there is no someone else. You're not in school anymore where there's a teacher who says get an A or get a B. This is you're building a company, and you need to think, how am I going to build the organization I want to build that is really solving the needs that I think need to get solved? You need to gut check on that all the time, and you need to carve out the time to do it, or else you're just kind of doing a flywheel of what gets me my next round of funding, what gets me to my next sort of vanity metric.
Have you developed a quote unquote morning routine for yourself that gets you into that state of planning? Sometimes on the team, we talk about the difference between working in the business versus working on the business. And it's kind of same with your life. Like sometimes you're just in the chaos of it all, and sometimes you're able to plan and get your ducks in a row. Do you have a process or a routine or something that works for you?
My morning routine usually involves 3 young children jumping on my head, which is a great way of becoming Zen. So other than having children jumping on my head, I have to put things in my calendar. So if I put something in my calendar, I will execute it as if it is a tactical task, even if it's much more a strategic, getting out an elevated sort of thinking time. So I have to treat my strategic thinking as if it is a deliverable.
Understood. Meaning that you'll block the time out in the calendar, say like time for Minnie to strategize X.
Yeah, but that doesn't actually hold for me. So it's more that I have to say, okay, I'm going to have a board meeting in 3 months where we discuss a new strategic imperative, or I usually need someone else to hold me accountable. So if it's just in my own calendar, it's usually not enough.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm sometimes just knowing yourself or being aware enough to know that having that coach or that accountability or something is the way for you to work.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to present to you on Friday my XYZ thing. Then I need to do it, even if,
I have to stay up all night to do it or whatever.
Yeah,
I have to get done.
But you're the guy down the street. Like, it doesn't really matter to you whether or not I do it. But if it's on my calendar and someone else is holding me accountable, it helps.
We talked a little bit about this, but I think it is important. We've had so many VCs and founders on this show talk about how it's lonely at the top. It's hard to be a founder. You talked about losing sleep and being so stressed you didn't even want to get out of bed. So one of the, cool things is just around like your thoughts around emotional resilience and chilling out. Can you talk a little bit more about just advice for people that are, too high stress? I love the story that you tell about like what, when people on their deathbed. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, people on their deathbed. I'm trying to remember what I said. People on their deathbed never say, I wish I'd been harder on myself.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I don't have great ways of accomplishing emotional resilience, but I do think it's the most important thing you get. And I think for me, every time I hit a low, I do think I have become more resilient when I've come out of that, which is I fear the lows less because I know that I can come out of them. And then things that used to seem, death-defyingly horrible when I was in my 20s no longer seem that important because I've sort of, I've experienced, I did a horrible presentation. I got up on stage, didn't go well. It's just not the end of the world.
Do, for people that maybe haven't had that as many experiences to go through the ups and the downs, can you think more about when you were down? What advice do you have for those that are like, this is fucked. I'm giving up tomorrow. I'm quitting. They're ready. They're right at that moment. What advice do you have for them to help them walk themselves back across the it's going to be okay?
I think different people probably have different strategies, and I think it's just really hard because I've done that, and I dropped out of Stanford and thought my goal was to go to Stanford, and now I'm a college dropout. And I'm never gonna, go back to school. And I went back and lived at home and thought, God, I'm not gonna finish college. It was a real goal of mine, and to go to Stanford in particular. And then I went back the next semester, and no one ever knew that I dropped out.
What got you? Was it mom and dad? Was it you? What got you to be like, you know what? I want to go back.
Yeah. So I think there are different tactics. One of my biggest ones is being able to talk about it. And that's for me. I'm a talker. I don't know what I'm thinking unless my mouth is open. And so I need to talk a lot. But when you're that horribly depressed, in my case, I was horribly depressed or scared and felt ashamed and all of those things, being able to tell someone else, it takes some of the edge off and then lets people in to be able to help you. And that's not just when you're depressed, but one of my big things is being able to say what you want help on or what you want is actually very hard for me.
Why do you think?
I think I'm nervous that then someone will say no. The story of venture capital actually that you asked earlier, how would someone go about getting into venture? For me, I showed up in LA and wanted this role. I wanted to be a partner in a venture fund here in LA, but was too nervous to say it. So like, I had a lot of meetings where I'd be like, oh, hey, I'm here. But like, I felt too presumptuous to show up and say, hey, I want to be a partner at your fund. That seemed like a very presumptuous thing to say. And yet if you don't say it, then no one's going to be able to help you achieve what you want.
Did you have a mentor or a coach, or was it family that sort of, gave you that extra boost that enabled you, or was it all through self-reflection and just kind of getting to know what you really want?
For me, it's been less about having any one particular mentor, although I've had a number of people who've been incredibly helpful to me throughout my life. But it's the things that sometimes stand out for me are the random sort of one-off type people who've given me a nudge, a hand, a piece of feedback. And some of those, I think people have given more, offhand, have really stuck with me and been very meaningful to me. And so I think not to underestimate the power that you can have on someone's life, even just, someone who barely knows you, right? And that some of those have been very big for me.
What are you most excited about right now? And if it's different than the podcast, because I want to talk a little bit about the LA Venture podcast and what you're doing, what are you most excited about right now?
Most excited about right now. I am excited about podcasting. Is so freaking fun. I love it. I'm super into that. I am excited for the state of venture in LA. That's a very true statement. Like, I think LA is just, I'm excited. Here's one reason I'm excited for the state of venture in LA, which is anytime you're joining something that feels like a rocket ship, like it is my advice to people when they're trying to decide what startup to join. I say, join a startup that is going to double in size every 6 months, or a startup that's printing money is actually usually what I say kind of flippantly, but like that's going to be the place where there's tons of opportunity. And so LA just feels like it is growing and taking off. And so it's fun to be a part of something that has great momentum. So that's exciting for me. I mean, obviously I just moved here. So the reason I moved here is because I'm excited about it.
And the podcast is part of that because you're starting it from scratch. It didn't exist, and now it's wholesomely because of your team's effort and energy. And as someone that is going through the grind week to week and doing something similar, what I've realized about the podcast is that it's something that you can learn yourself from, but it's also something that you can help others, and that opportunity of kind of growing as an individual while also having the opportunity to teach people about what it's like to be in your shoes it's something that's been so fulfilling for me.
Yeah, me too. It's also it's given me more appreciation, I think, for people in creative endeavors, because you're really putting something out there that represents you and putting it out there to be judged in a way. And I've never been an artist in a professional sense. I still wouldn't say I'm an artist, but so I think I've just been growing by doing something that makes me slightly uncomfortable too.
Minnie, where can people find you that want to connect with you online?
I mean, my LA Venture podcast is the best way to hear a lot of me talking, which I'm trying to talk less and let my guests talk more. And other than that, it's odd, but my biggest network by far is LinkedIn. So I'm Minnie I'm Minnie Ingersoll. There aren't that many Minnies in the world.
Minnie, this has been an amazing episode. I want to thank you so much. Guys, I'm Sean Goldfaden, CEO of Coefficient Labs. This is Demo Day.
There's just so many different moving pieces in doing a startup, which is why, even when you're finding a co-founder and you're finding additional team members, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you.